All right, thanks for bearing with me, guys. We are going live in 3, 2, 1.
Hello.
Hello, Brad.
All right, you are live.
Yeah, thanks. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to people all across the city of Grand Forks. This is the Grand Forks City Council's Committee of the Whole for Monday, May 26th. Under item 1, call to order, 1.1, welcome and roll call. Marshall?
Here.
Mock?
Here.
Weber?
Here.
Veen?
Here.
Weigel?
Here.
Sandy's here. Dockler? All right. We're all present other than Dockler. We have a quorum. Under item 2, discussion items. Item 2.1, amendment to licensed premises from Bonzers to allow for a patio. Mr. Brooks.
Thank you, Council. I have been meeting with lots of restaurants and bars over the last few months, and one of the items as we start to open up things in the city that has been a concern of theirs has been the limited capacity that they can have inside their restaurants and bars. One of the ways around that or to enhance that has been the use of patios and or outdoor seating. We've got a few that are taking the opportunity to do just that. And this particular item on tonight's meeting actually came out of a meeting with the DDA. I've been invited to their weekly meeting where they meet and discuss items as they come up. And we met with, or I received a request from Bonzers to expand their patio, and actually it would be on the back side of the building, so not on the Demers side, but where the parking is behind the building. This particular request, most of these can be done administratively. This particular request is coming to you because this lot, although owned by the same individual that they rent from, is actually on a different parcel. So one of the things we have requested in this case is for the owner of that property to submit a letter as well. So they're in the process of getting that to us, and I don't anticipate any problems. But the request then is for a 25 by 40 foot patio area. This will leave us enough room for the access drive, and will only take out about 4 parking stalls that are located behind Bonzers. So we do anticipate, like I said, a few others going through this process, but not all of them will come before you. A lot of those can be done administratively. So with that, we do recommend approval. And I know we've received a lot of support on these, so happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. Has joined the meeting. Are there any comments or questions for Mr. Brooks?
I
Mr. Veen?
have a question. I like this idea. It certainly makes sense in this situation that works out well. Can you see in different situations where there may be some unintended consequences which could be detrimental to the ordinance?
Well, one of the things that we always look for is to make sure that obviously safety is a concern, making sure that it's protected from traffic, those types of things. But currently this is probably still lower speed and everything else than you'd have out on Demers. But of course you have the parking lane and some other things that protect that. The unintended consequences that we've talked about in some of the other areas of town is where parking may be taken out to allow these, but actually in our current situation where most parking lots aren't being completely filled up. So and I'd mentioned to somebody earlier today that we're even aware of some other cities that are looking to reduce parking during the current situation. So we've got our eyes on that too. So you may see some follow-up things going on with this, as well as staff continues to monitor some of those things. So I didn't see any other issues with this, and we do have some other areas like the hub. They came to you, I think, probably a couple years ago their particular patio that they have is actually on a neighboring parcel. And that's worked out, I think, fairly well. We haven't had any issues with that, and the structure they built, I think, looks good, and it adds to the downtown. So I think they did. There is a certain time that they themselves choose to shut some of these down, where there's been some outdoor seating. So maybe these are good, work till about 9 o'clock, and then they bring them then themselves. But not a requirement on our behalf, but in terms of their internal management, they still have to police kind of these areas themselves in terms of making sure that customers are being served and those types of things, and they still have their eyes on these spots. So they do a pretty good job of that. Most of the places have been really good about that already.
You, Mr. Brooks. Mr. Veen, any other comments or questions? Mr. Weber, did you have a comment?
Yeah, very quickly, Mr. Brooks, at the corner of Fifth and Demers, it's another property owner, but there's a large underutilized kind of rough looking patio area that seems to me like it would be fantastic, especially with the new grocery store going in across the street, all the improvements on Demers. Not that I'm opposed to what they're proposing in the back, but has there been any conversation about some joint use, shared use of that what looks like an ideal patio area? Right now in the staff report, it's a bunch of trees growing there out of some not particularly attractive concrete flower boxes.
Yeah, I agree that would be a great spot to have that. I know they had been in conversations once upon a time, or at least it's been discussed. I don't know to what degree. That is a separate property owner, so those two would have to come to an agreement. And if they did, they would have to go through the same process in terms of asking for their footprint for liquor to be served, asking for that to be expanded to that neighboring property. So if they came to that agreement, then that would have to be before you again.
Very good. Thanks.
Mr. Weigel, questions?
I'll just be real brief. I think the little things that we can do to help businesses, especially during these times, are important. And I appreciate them thinking outside the box to hopefully drive some more revenue for their business. So with that, I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
Moved by Weigel, second by Weber. Any other comments? Yes, Ms. Mott.
Ryan, do you know if other businesses, maybe not just bars, but bars and restaurants, are thinking of adding patio space to help with capacity issues? Is this something several are thinking of?
Yes. So yeah, I know Darcy's, I'll say that there are other restaurants. Ground Round has actually submitted something to us. Darcy's, so yeah, there are more than a handful that are looking into these and trying to maximize. Some of them have capacity issues in terms of they already had a small space and how to deal with the social distancing. So I think your point is great that they're having a difficult time trying to, in terms of I think as Councilman Weigel said, they're trying to make up revenue that they would have normally had on a May 26th night of 2020 had there not been a pandemic. So these things that the city's trying to help them, but at the same time, we've done other things to try to assist, and right now they're not at 100%, and so I've heard that loud and clear from them. So they're doing a lot of things outside of the box, and we've tried to assist them, and then we're needed bring them forward to you where code requires that type of thing. So
Good. Thank you.
Yep.
Good question. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, we have a motion and a second on the floor. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Very good. Motion carries unanimously. Item 2.2, approval of 2020 through 2024 consolidated plan, citizen participation plan, analysis of impediments to fair housing choice, And 2020 annual action plan, including CDBG CV funds. I guess I assumed that Miss Richards would be taking this. Is she with us tonight?
Yes, Miss Richards, you are an attendee currently on our panel. Can you please raise your hand so I can turn you over? Can you please raise your hand?
Can you hear me?
Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
Great. Item 2.2.
That's a long list that you read, Mr. Sandy. And so these elements have been before you several times in the last year and a half. So I'm going to try to be brief in summarizing what got us here, but certainly stand for questions once I've kind of caught us up to date. This includes, as Mr. Sandy read, several items, including our long-term 5-year plan and our current budget for 2020. This first came to you in December of 2018 when you authorized us to contract with Root Policy to help us with some of that data collection and analysis for some of these long-term elements. Jen Garner from Root then gave a presentation late last year to kind of summarize what the data collection had shown, some of those findings and guiding principles. Then I was in front of this group in March of this year with draft documents for those long-term items, as well as preliminary funding recommendations for our 2020 regular CDBG program, as well as funding recommendations for a new community services grant program. That's kind of seen the findings from some of that long-term process really indicated that those operating funds were crucial for our area nonprofits. And since those CDBG dollars had been dwindling, using Fund 2163 or sales tax dollars to supplement those operating funds was kind of a new recommendation for 2020. So we got as far as that in early March. Then obviously COVID hit and we kind of stalled a bit. The good news is through the CARES Act, we heard in early April that the city would be getting an additional $268,000 of CDBG funding. That's the CDBG CV referred to in the staff report. So in mid-April, I came back to the council with first the recognition that we had this money and then a preliminary approach to allocate it. And that approach was to use the additional CDBG funds to supplant those CSG, community service grant dollars, recognizing that sales tax was going to take a hit. And so probably wise to reserve those funds. And then a preliminary approach to allocating the balance just since we had just completed our 2020 allocation process. Our plan was to then just kind of disperse those additional CDBG CV funds to the original applicant pool for operating funds with kind of an emphasis on those emergency services, such as food pantries that were really seeing increased demand. Subsequent to that, we had some listening sessions. Mr. Weber hosted several of those with businesses. We did have one on housing insecurity that the panel was led by Ms. Dockler and Ms. Mock. Out of that listening session, there was a real strong support for an eviction prevention type program that would provide some sort of access to legal services for those facing evictions. So from that discussion, what you see in your staff report today, the only real addition or change from what you had seen previously is now that there is a new applicant or program listed for from High Plains Fair Housing Center for an eviction prevention program. That's a lot of words. Like I said, a lot of this you have seen multiple times, but what we're asking for tonight is just to set June 1st as the public hearing date to take final action on the long-term elements of the 2020 through 2024 consolidated plan, the analysis of impediments to fair housing choice, our citizen participation plan, and our 2020 annual action plan or 2020 budget, which now incorporates those CDBG, CV, or CARES Act dollars into our regular 2020 CDBG entitlement program. I hope I haven't bored you or confused you too much, but I'm happy to stand for any questions on any of the elements before you.
Yeah, Ms. Marshall.
So at this point, Ms. Richards, we would just be approving going ahead with the public hearing. But would the motion also include approving the various aspects of the work that you've reviewed with us?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, certainly any discussion about those recommendations is appropriate tonight, but then the action would be hold that public hearing to accept public testimony and then take final action on all those recommendations on June 1st.
Okay, well, I would like to move approval of the request and just acknowledge that the work that Councilwoman Dr. Dockler and Mock did to raise this issue and the willingness of High Plains Fair Housing to step forward and offer a robust proposal for an eviction prevention program. That's something that we don't have anything like in the state. And there's really very little protection for people who are threatened with eviction, threatened with late fees, and who actually are subject to going through eviction hearings. I think this will go a long ways towards helping to prevent people from becoming homeless. And we certainly know that with the COVID-19, people are really hurting financially. For those who are not able to work from home. And it's very challenging for many, many families to be able to survive in this. We also know that there have been, I think the study showed that there were close to 300 evictions across the state last year, and at least 75% of them were because of lack of funds to pay rent in a timely manner. So I think this is a good resolution. It would be a good service to add to the other services that are available, and to augment the work that those emergency services agencies are doing to actually help people with some financial costs of paying the rent as well. So again, I would move to approve as requested.
I would second that.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Marshall. There's a motion by Marshall, second by Dockler. Any other comments, Mr. Weber?
Yes, the staff report makes mention of the CSG, the Community Services Grant, as you've mentioned, Ms. Richards. There was a word that I heard you use that perhaps helps clarify for me the intention. Right now, the city portion, the CSG funds, those are being held in reserve. Is that the language that you used?
I'm not sure what I said, but that kind of summarizes it correctly. They're not being reallocated to anything else. They're just would not be expended for that program in 2020. It would still act as a placeholder for the 2021 and succeeding budget years. Again, depending on what other federal funding may come into the community, it may or may not be needed, but it's certainly not the intent to discontinue it permanently.
Right. In fact, I kind of like going back, and I believe you did use the word reserve, and I like that word. Holding it in reserve, we're not allocating it right now, but neither are we saying that we won't expend it this year. That will be held in reserve, and if there are needs that we want to address as a result of COVID, et cetera. That was the intention of those funds. But with these new federal COVID funds coming in, we're holding the CSG funds in reserve. Is that am I reading the intention correctly there? That would be my intention for these. Should I make a specific request, a specific amendment to the motion, Ms. Richards or Mr. Phelan?
My thought is, it's one of those areas we've identified. Using the word reserve, that's what reserve means to me, is that we have these federal monies that are going to more than supplement what we were going to do with local monies. We're setting them aside in a reserve. We're not quite sure how sales tax will come in the remainder of the year. So like other things like beautification and other things, we've set those aside to say, let's not expend those funds, not knowing how the remainder part of the budget year is going to go. So I think if we are reserving those along with other potential funds too. And in this case, it's good news because we got more than what we had allocated or appropriated, I should say.
Is there a need for an amendment to clarify this this concept of putting those funds in reserve, or is that just built into the system?
I would say, I think it's good if you want it that way, just to put that word with how we're responding to it, so that for the record, it's in the motion.
Ms. Marshall, you were instrumental in helping with the creation of the CSG funds, recognizing that CDBG funds have been declining over the years. Would you be willing to make that amendment to your motion?
Yes, I would be willing to add the language that speaks to those community service grant funds being held in reserve pending future decisions.
So, first of all, Ms. Dockler, are you okay with that
Yes.
amendment? Okay. I don't think we can tie the hands of future council.
No, I'm wanting to tie the hands of through this budget year. These funds have already been allocated for human service needs.
I
We're
understand
choosing to
whether
not
it's
expend them at this time. We're making it explicit that they're being held in reserve in the event that those needs might arise during this year.
as opposed to what though?
Them being reallocated elsewhere or being canceled in some way.
Them being reallocated by whom?
The
Mr.
process, they were allocated for human service funds. Because
Sure.
of the federal monies that came in, they are now being held in reserve in the event that we have unseen human service needs in our community. With COVID, we don't know how long this is going to last. We hope for the best, prepare for the worst. I want to make sure that we're continuing to hold these funds in reserve if there are needs this year. Perhaps that's already implicit in the decision. I just wanted to make it explicit.
Sounds good. Very good. And anyone else have any other thoughts, Mr. Weigel?
I don't really have any comments on what you guys were talking about, but I do have some concerns when I look at some of the projects that were funded. I know I had brought this up in the past. When I look at the bricks and mortar section, there's no doubt in my mind that all 5 projects are very important. But the one thing that I look at is, out of all these projects, most of them are nearly completely funded. Center Inc. requested $82,080. They received they may receive $82,000 of that money. Phoenix Elementary School, for a inclusive playground, they requested $151,000 and some change. They're due to receive $103,000. St. Joseph's Social Care, for a restroom renovation, asked for $56,600. They're getting $50,000. Faith and Hope LP, for some renovation of some group homes and apartments, they asked for $265,000. They got $155,000. And Northlands Rescue Mission, for a heating system upgrade, asked for $99,000. They're receiving $33,000, about 1/3 of what they asked for. I brought up the fact in the past that the playground is going to be owned by Grand Forks Public School, which is already a taxing entity. I understand that this was brought forward by the Parent Teacher Association, but I think that the mission's their request for a heating system upgrade could be argued is one of the most important things on this item that we're only funding at about 30%. I know the committee did a lot of great work, and I respect the work that they do, but I'd love to find a way today that we can get them to more than 30%. We all know they fill a critical role in our community, and I think a heating system upgrade, it is very important, and we need to take that seriously. And I'd open it up to anybody else that has recommendations on how we can get past that 30%.
If I may, I just want to offer one point of clarification. The playground is not, it's owned by the community. The school district just agreed to be the fiscal agent for the funds to pass through. The neighborhood organization that requested these funds can't serve as that entity. So it's not exactly accurate to say that the school would be owning this. This is for the use of the whole community. It fits with the guidelines of CDBG funds. And I know from past experience that the Citizen Advisory Committee goes through a long, detailed process of reviewing these applications. What we get is a final tabulation, but they've looked very closely at the application. Often, I believe, Ms. Richards, with the chance for interviews or Q&A with the applicants as well. And so I wasn't on the CAC this year, but I know that that's the general process. So I'm inclined to go with the recommendation of the citizen group that has done all of this work. Of course, as council, we do have a final right of approving or altering those recommendations. But my inclination is to go along with the citizen volunteers who've put in a lot of time and energy reviewing all of the applications, who have a deeper, more intimate knowledge of the applications.
And a little background to Mr. Weigel's point, if I may, Chairman Sandy.
Yes, ma'am.
The funding recommendations were provided by staff, but they try to reflect the rankings of the review committee. I think part of the reason that Northlands Rescue Mission was kind of ranked low was just a function of the fact that they had received approximately $1 million over the last couple years for heating system upgrades. And the requested funding in this cycle was something that could kind of be done on an incremental basis. I believe it's something like 30 adjustment features that can be done individually. So it did really lend itself to kind of a unit approach. The ranking of the Community Advisory Committee is our process. And since that ranked lower than any of the other projects, it was kind of funded accordingly. But those funding amounts are kind of a function both of the practicality of the project. It does a project no good to give them half funding if you can't start a project for half the funding. And that's kind of the case with restrooms at St. Joseph's. $50,000 is kind of seen as the minimal amount to give them an actual viable project. With the mission, like I said, it's approximately 30 controllers, and a project can be done on any number of those controllers from 30 on up to the 99 or whatever it was that they requested. So that's just a little bit of the nuance behind both, I think, the review committee's recommendation to fund them lower because they had received so much funding recently, and then just the kind of nuts and bolts approach to if the Community Advisory Committee thinks that it warrants funding, then staff works to find it funding at a level that is appropriate for the project, as well as reflecting the rankings scores that they received.
Thank you, Ms. Richards. Yes, Ms. Mock.
So I guess, Ms. Richards, to Mr. Weigel's point, you're not worried that with this funding level, the mission won't have heat next year. This is like they'll be able to functionally provide services, and this won't cause a long-term problem.
My understanding, this is more of a way to enhance the comfort at different offices and different levels. They did get pretty much a new boiler system, and these are some of the things that they're finding after that new boiler system has been installed that would be a nice add-on. So yeah, certainly it's a great project and it will make the building more comfortable for both the residents and the staff. But I think it is reflective of the fact that they've received $1 million for heating upgrades in the last couple of years. And that's why their score was lowest of the 5.
Mr. Weigel?
Just briefly, maybe before our next meeting, could you get a list of everything that any organization that's on here that's received money? Could you, over the last 5 years, pull that list together so we can see who else has received CDBG funds, and tabulate those as well? I understand that this is a portion that, sure, to me, you don't patch together a heating system. I understand why they want to get it all done, to get everything done at once. When I go replace tires on my car, I don't replace one and then a year later replace 2, 3, and 4. I think it's important that they get it done. And like I said, I'd still like to see some funds shifted around so that they can get this heating project done. And so then they're not coming back next year asking for another $30,000 and another year after that asking for another $30,000.
Well, I'm taking a bit of a leap here, but we can certainly, first of all, we can certainly provide you with that funding history of these bricks and mortar applicants. Second of all, we did just have a sale close on a property that had a long held rent rehab mortgage that was unexpected, that yielded about $40,000 of unexpected program income. I don't know that we've received the check, but we know that's going to happen. With your acquiescence, we could certainly make any second tier funding that comes in, we could direct it to that mission project. And I think right out of the chute, that would direct approximately $40,000 towards it.
That would be fantastic. Is there a way that we can work that into the motion?
I can certainly bring better detail to the next meeting on June 1st, but if
We can always put that funding on reserve, Danny, if you want to.
Sounds good to me.
Great. Are there any other comments? I, for one, would actually like to echo Mr. Weigel's sentiments regarding the funding for the park. I think it's a great project, but contrary to what Mr. Weber said, the school district has never gone without a park at one of their schools, although they are certainly amenities for the community. That's always been the school district's responsibility and not the responsibility of the city of Grand Forks. However, I do agree with Mr. Weber that the Community Advisory Committee worked very hard on reviewing all of the applications and providing very thoughtful and conscientious scoring and recommendations to the City Council. And I want to see us uphold this recommendation with Danny's or Mr. Weigel's addition, if we can beef up the missions heating system funding. I would just suggest that as a group that has to support these in the future, it's a reasonable question to ask, should we be supporting organizations that would traditionally get their funding from a different taxing entity, whether it's the parks, the schools, or the county? I, for one, don't believe so, because I firmly believe that those organizations will figure out how to support their own mission and the things that they find critical to their mission. And so, although I'm going to go along with the motion and second today, I completely disagree with us providing funding for any other taxing entities' projects, and believe that we as an organization should at some point take a motion and a second and vote on whether we're willing to do this again in the future. I don't think we should punish the Phoenix Parent Teacher Organization for bringing this forward, and I commend them for doing this. I do, however, believe that we shouldn't be supporting projects like this in the future. Of course, that's just my opinion. Yes, Ms. Marshall.
Yeah, just these kinds of decisions are complicated and they're nuanced. And having sat on the community or citizens advisory committee and been a part of that conversation, I feel like I've got a little bit more insight into that. However, at the same time, it was several months ago that we reviewed those applications, and so I will probably have to ask Ms. Richards for some clarification. But I know that we looked at this, I believe, as a collaborative project with the community. It's not adjacent to the school. The school has a little playground right adjacent to the front door of the school. This would be in a lot that's adjacent but not currently occupied, as I understand, with any structures right now. And it would be designed to be particularly designed around the needs of children with autism, and it would be open for public use as well. So it has some unique features that they're proposing, and it would be a project that would be very accessible to members of the community. I don't remember other features of that, Ms. Richards, but I know that there were some uniquenesses to the proposal that maybe make it more nuanced than what you would know if you weren't on the community advisory and hadn't gone through listening to the presentations and going through some pretty extensive applications. So I appreciate the comments from Mr. Weber. I think that when we ask community citizens to help out with making these kind of recommendations, while it's good to ask questions, it's good to have clarification. It's also good to support the work that the committees have done, whether it's this committee or any other committee that has a similar function. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Marshall. Ms. Mock, I think you had a comment.
I think Ms. Marshall kind of hinted at it. I was just going to ask if there were any eligibility requirements for putting in an application, but it sounds like this is not necessarily a school district playground. This seems to be essentially a nonprofit-led project that then is just going by school district or on school district land.
Ms. Richards?
There's no concern about the eligibility. It's not based on the ownership. It's based on the area that it serves. We could not do this at Discovery School, but we can do it at Phoenix because it serves a low to moderate income neighborhood, as well as the students at the school. More than 51% of the students receive assistance through the school lunch program and that sort of thing. So CDBG is blind to the ownership of the property. It's more concerned about who's going to benefit from it. And in this case, since it meets the low to moderate benefit requirement, that's the concern of the CDBG program.
And it will be open to the public.
I hate to age myself, but I'm going to share some history here. The vacant lot that Ms. Marshall referred to had homes on it that were demolished after the 97 flood. And the city donated this land to the school district because, as a kind of our version of an inner city school, there's pretty limited playground space at what was then the Belmont school site and is now Phoenix Elementary. So this site was given from the city to the school district as a site for playing fields or future playground. So there's absolutely no issue with using CDBG funds for playground equipment, whether it's for the park district or a school district, as long as it meets that low to moderate income beneficiary requirement.
That's the purpose of those funds being allocated. Okay.
I would note, Mr. Weigel, I know you want to speak, but our forefathers, the whomever was on the council back then, had the forethought to give them the land for this purpose. Yet 23 years later, they still haven't figured out how to fund their own project. I'm beside myself trying to figure out the logic on this. Mr. Weigel.
Just real quickly. So I think I got just 3 comments to make. The Grand Forks Public School owns the property, correct? The Grand Forks Public Schools are going to be maintaining the playground, correct?
I believe the will help with the installation, that there's some sort of agreement between the school district and the park district, that the park district does the install, but the school district maintains them.
So to the common person that's going to come around and say, well, who owns this playground? If they own the property and they're responsible for maintaining it, the common person would understand that it's their playground. But I don't think I understood correctly. Is it open to the public to use whenever they would like to?
As far as I understand, it would be like any other school playground.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure it is. So yeah, the school district and the park district, the 2 entities that should be actually paying for this, are going to own it and maintain it, yet we're paying for the majority of it. So,
may I, Mr. Sandy?
I'd love to hear your thoughts, Mr. Weber.
Sure. So this idea that these are our dollars, these are federal pass-through dollars for a very specific purpose to serve low-income neighborhoods and needs. If we were holding meetings in council chambers, I suspect that people would have an opportunity to come and be in the room in case there were questions about the project. Because this particular project is gaining so much attention, I'm wondering, Ms. Richards, is it possible to reach out to the principals on this, the applicants, which the applicants were not the school district, right? The applicants were the neighborhood group. The school district is simply the fiscal agent. Would it be possible to have them here, at least give them make them aware that this might come up next Monday, and that there may be questions, and can we provide them an opportunity to give a clearer picture of what's going on here?
I can certainly reach out and let both Mr. Vignes, who was the PTO president and applicant, as well as perhaps whoever his successor is now. But yes, I will let them know that there's been this discussion. I just want to kind of echo the fact that this is really not looking at improving the property of a taxing entity so much as providing an amenity for a low to moderate income neighborhood. That's HUD's approach to it. That's, as staff, that's our approach to it. Is it eligible? Yes, it is, because it serves a low to moderate income area, regardless of who owns the property. We don't fund for profit, but we have paid for playgrounds on Housing Authority or Grand Forks Homes properties that serve, again, if it's a low to moderate income clientele or neighborhood, then the ownership is not so important as who will be using the facility in HUD's eyes.
I appreciate that. I don't think there's anyone here saying that they're not interested in funding this project. I still am of the opinion that the Housing Authority, for example, is not a taxing entity. And they aren't there. Whoever manages their parks aren't a taxing entity. Whatever affiliates, the PTO is an affiliate of the school district of Phoenix. And so, again, in my opinion, I don't believe we should be using these funds when they're affiliated with a taxing entity that can come up with the funds on their own. So I again will say that I think this is a great project and I'm happy to move it forward. And I don't think there will be any concern about asking the applicants. If you want to get somebody on the call, why don't you ask somebody from the school board to show up so that they can answer the question, why haven't they paid for this already since the city gave them this 23 years ago? But that's neither here nor there. Yes, Ms. Donkler.
Putting on an old hat, I do believe that schools, they do want some green space ratio to the students that they have. So even though they have this undeveloped land over at Phoenix, they do want space for kids to be able to run around, to use it for gym class, just like at Winship, where my kids currently go to school. They have green space that has been undeveloped so that they can get out and literally run around, that they're not just confined to Pete Rock on a swing set. So I would imagine that that has something to do with wanting to maintain some of that green space. I do have a couple questions too. I think it was intriguing to me that you said that you'd be interested in talking about reserving CDBG funds for entities that aren't receiving any kind of federal tax dollars or funding. I think that would be really hard. We'd have to very clearly define what you mean by that, whether it's just local taxing agencies that you're looking at, because most nonprofits, if they have a viable business model, are going to be receiving multitudes of federal finance dollars, which would be tax dollars technically. So I would be interested in having that conversation if we were to go in that direction about what that exactly means and then who would be eligible for it. And I'm really grateful that Ms. Richards kind of defined what the CDBG funds are for, which is very much services. Even though it's the bricks and mortar conversation of it that they're applying for, it's still very service focused, very people focused. And I think that that is the intent of the CDBG funds. It certainly is what I understood it to be when I was applying for those funds through the Salvation Army or LSS when I was working there, for brick and mortar or for service-oriented dollars through CDBG funds. I do think it's important, just to echo what some of my fellow council members have said too, is that we seriously take into account the time and effort that people who volunteered to be on these committees put into these allocations. Not just because they put the time in to do it, but because I do truthfully think that they were chosen to be a part of those committees because of their experiences within the community, because of their experience with CDBG previously. And so it's not like they're making these decisions without anything to pull from in the past. And so I think we walk a very fine line of coming in at the end, not to say that we can't ask questions. Absolutely, we have to ask questions. Anytime that you're spending money, that's a given. But I do think that we have to be careful about telling these committees exactly what they need to do with these dollars when they've spent all of this time and they have that education. I'm very grateful that Ms. Richards is bringing back more information for us at Mr. Weigel's request. I do think that that will be helpful in moving forward and how we want to work with CDBG. But if memory is serving me correctly, and Ms. Richards will be able to fact check me on this, but I do remember that there were discussions in the past where council stepped into these CDBG allocations and it kind of became a quagmire for the nonprofits and the nonprofit community as a whole. Certainly Ms. Richards probably could speak to this more because she has more experience with CDBG and its funding and those relationships. But I do think we walk a really fine line and we need to be careful about how we present ourselves and kind of interlope into this process at the very end like this.
Yep, Mr. Weigel.
I'll just be brief. I know, Mr. Weber, you said something that kind of want to talk a little bit. You said there are pass-through federal funds. But they're passed through federal funds from federal taxes, which we all pay. So they are all of our tax dollars, and we do need to be responsible for them. And when one taxing entity is giving funds to another taxing entity, like Mr. Sandy said, we do need to be conscious about that. And while they're not coming directly from the Grand Forks community, they really are. They're citizens all over Grand Forks paying their federal funds that go into this. I think that's important that we do remember that even though they are federal dollars, they are still federal tax dollars that all of us pay. And with that, I'll end my part and I won't talk anymore.
That sounds very good. Actually, North Dakota is a welfare state. We receive more in federal dollars than we spend. But these federal dollars, you're complaining about one taxing entity going to another taxing entity. It's coming from the feds to our community to be used for a very specific purpose. And it isn't city dollars, and it isn't school district dollars. These are dollars intended for specific needs that would not normally be addressed by either the city or the school district. So that's the CDBG funding has a long history going back decades. And that's probably all that needs to be said about that. Most importantly, I'm hoping that Mr. Vignes and some of his collaborators on the application can be available, because they can speak to this in a far more articulate and clear fashion than myself. Thank you.
And Mr. Vignes said on Facebook that he would be willing to chat with us. So just thought I'd throw that out there.
Great.
This, again, I'll go back to, I think this is much bigger than the specific playground is not the issue. The issue is whether we should be supporting local nonprofits that are affiliates of other taxing entities. For example, what if the local Squirt hockey club had its nonprofit and decided that they wanted to they want a hockey arena in an area that has LMI eligibility. And they came to the city and asked for $500,000 of CDBG funds. Would we even consider that? That's, in my opinion, a reasonable question. Would we or wouldn't we? In my opinion, facilities for example, hockey teams to play is managed and handled by the park district. That's why they're their own taxing entity, so that they can deal with that. I believe this has a similar flavor, and in which case I don't agree with us supporting affiliates of other taxing entities. I don't know how everyone else feels though, and if I'm outvoted, so be it. I won't bring it up again. To me, that's at issue here, not this park. I don't care about the park. I hope we build it and it's great. We can have that conversation at another day if you want to. That's fine by me. Perhaps next time we start talking about the 2021 CDBG funding. How's that? Nod of heads, everyone. Great. Anyone else have any thoughts or interests to carry this on longer? Seeing none. All those in favor of approving the motion and second with the setting aside some funds for a future date, say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously. Very good. And I don't believe any of us are interlopers for wanting to manage the funds, the taxing funds that come through. We're not sticking our neck, in my opinion, we're not sticking ourselves in a place where people don't want us. This is our job. Item 2.3, plans and specs for project 8068, shared use path on Columbia Road. Mr. Krenko.
Good evening, Council President Sandy and members of the committee. The proposed project consists of installation of a 10-foot wide concrete shared use path on the west side of South Columbia Road between 40th and 47th Avenue South. This project uses federal funds through the Transportation Alternatives Program, which is an 80% federal, 20% local cost split with a maximum federal contribution of $290,000. These funds are for construction only. Overall, the total anticipated project cost is about $425,000, and the city share for this project is anticipated to be about $156,000. Project was designed by city staff, which saved the city approximately $80,000, and it's anticipated that this project will be bid at either the August or the October NDDOT bid opening. Construction could possibly begin as early as 2020, but will likely be constructed and see the completion of construction in the 2021 construction season. And with that, staff is recommending approval of the plans and specifications for the project.
Any comments or questions for Mr. Krenko?
Just make one quick comment. This came up a few years back. We held off with the construction of this. I think it's been beneficial to wait until Columbia Road was constructed. We have the right grades, and actually we have a better cost share mechanism now than we would have had back then. So I think the delay was worth it. And with that, I'd make a motion to approve.
Mr. Veen moves approval. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Weber. Mr. Krenko, I have a question. Is this shared use path on the east side or the west side of Columbia Road?
It would be located on the west side. That's where the remainder of our shared use path is, north of Columbia there.
So we've been talking about pedestrian safety through that corridor, specifically related to students that are venturing back and forth from Discovery School to the east side of Columbia and back. Are we taking any of those discussions into consideration when we design this shared use path?
Overall, this project itself, it's similar to when we would install a concrete sidewalk. For this, it's just mainly the continuation of the existing shared use path on Columbia and tying into the shared use path that's down on 47. Overall, there is a traffic signal that is planned to be installed, I believe, this summer at the intersection of 43rd, which was one of the concerns that was kind of brought up in that area, or continuing through to the east, and concerns about pedestrians crossing through. I believe also for the concerns that were issued, or the concerns that came up regarding students crossing at that location, I believe the subdivision that is being put together in that also has a fence that is being proposed along the east side of it to prevent pedestrian walkthroughs at that location.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Krako. Any other comments? There's a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Item 2.4, bids for project 8156, right turn lane at South Washington and 42nd Street. Mr. Lieberman, good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Sandy. Good evening. This evening I have two agenda item requests. Both are requests to approve a low bid award of a contract. This first one, this project constructs a right turn lane on South Washington Street. It serves traffic in the southbound lane as it wants to turn right or west to the district apartments, which are under construction. So it's a safety issue, provides a deceleration lane. This previously met the council on May 4th, where the council approved plans and specifications. Since then, we have advertised for bids. We received 3 bids ranging roughly from $117,000 to $137,000. This is funded from the Streets and Infrastructure Fund 4815 entirely. And we are recommending award of the low bidder, the contract to the low bidder, MAC Construction, in the amount of $117,560.50. This is roughly 1% over our engineer's estimate, so we are very pleased that we had a pretty good estimate for this one and good bids. So with that, we are recommending award of the low bid.
Great, thank you, Mr. Lieberman. Any comments or questions?
Move approval.
Moved by Weber, second by Weigel. Any other comments? Mr. Lieberman, for the sake of argument, as the new assistant city engineer, it's my recommendation that the right turn lanes get installed every time we redo a road so that we don't have to go back and spend $117,000 on a new right turn lane. That's just, again, my opinion. Any other comments?
Thank you.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously. Item 2.5, bids for project 8177, 8178, 79, and 80, District 574, 348, 575, and 745, sanitary sewer, water main, storm sewer, paving, and street lighting for 36th Avenue South from South Washington Street to South 15th Street. Again, Mr. Lieberman.
Thank you. This project constructs a section of 36th Avenue South, connecting 15th Street South to Washington Street. This was initiated at the request of the developer, Crary Real Estate. All costs for this project are will be assessed to the benefiting properties. There is no city cost share for this. Previously, the council approved plans and specifications on March 16th, and we held a bid opening on May 18th. We received 3 bids that were actually very close to each other, ranging from roughly $455,000 to $458,000. So a very tight spread. Of note, the low bidder, which was Op Construction, was approximately 15% above our engineer's estimate. So we had to scratch our heads and look at our estimate. We really attributed this to a relatively young engineer getting experience, and we don't feel that our estimate was, our quantities weren't necessarily wrong, but maybe we were a little optimistic in the prices we would get. But given the three bids that were so close to each other, we're very confident that we're receiving a good low bid for this project. So with that, we're recommending award of the low bid to Op Construction in the amount of $455,000, $192.73. Pending your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Lieberman. Any questions? Yes, Ms. Monk.
Are you, or the engineering department, are you guys tracking any of the costs of materials or expecting to see fluctuations in material prices with everything that's going on? I imagine between oil and fuel costs and pipe and suppliers, it could either be really good or really bad for bids.
Yeah, we do that. It helps us in programming our projects and when selecting specific unit costs for items. Sometimes it's difficult to predict exactly what factors are going to influence a specific bid. I think in this case, some of the unit costs that our engineer picked were just a little bit optimistic. They weren't unrealistic, but in this current environment, I think we were just a little bit low.
Are you expecting major fluctuations going through the summer?
These two, we don't have many more projects that will be advertised for bid, but historically, the later we get into the season, many of the construction contractors are filling up their schedules. So we pay a little bit more of a premium for awards later in the year. So it's possible that came into play here as well.
Sure. I'll move approval.
It's moved by Mock. Is there a second?
Second.
By Weigel. Are there any other comments? Mr. Lieberman, I have a quick question.
Yes.
This road, 36th Avenue South, is connecting onto South Washington Street, correct?
It is.
And so they're going to be doing site work on the intersection?
They will be connecting. Yes, they'll be installing that right turn lane, which
they are installing a right turn lane from Washington.
I'm sorry, confusing the previous item. No, they are connecting up to the intersection.
Up to the intersection. So
yes.
At what point are we going to be asked to come back to put in the right turn lane there from Washington onto 36th Avenue South? It's a rhetorical question, Mr.
Okay.
Don't worry about it. All right. There's a motion and a second. Any other comments? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Lieberman, for putting up with me.
Thank you.
Item 2.6, construction engineering agreement for project 7951 traffic signal backplates and red light confirmation indicators. Mr. Krenko.
Good evening once again. The agreement before you is a standard construction engineering agreement through the North Dakota Department of Transportation and KLJ Engineering for using federal funds through the Highway Safety Improvement Program for construction engineering services. The project itself includes the installation of retroreflective backplates and red light confirmation indicators in an effort to reduce the number of unintentional red light running as well as enforcement of or to prevent red light running. These are planned to be installed at a number of signalized intersections throughout the city. KLJ Engineering has designed the project, and they've completed a similar project in Bismarck a few years ago. This project is funded through the HSIP, and it's on a 90% federal, 10% local, up to a maximum contribution of about $228,000 for construction and construction engineering services. The overall total project cost is anticipated to be about $381,000, with approximately $153,000 being the city's share. And with that, staff is recommending approval of the agreement and any necessary budget amendment for the project.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Krinkle. Any questions?
Move approval.
Ms. Marshall moves approval. Is there a second by Mock? Yes, excellent. Any other comments or questions? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Krenko.
Thank you.
Item 2.7, wastewater treatment plant replacement parts. Is Parvy with us tonight? Or does anyone not want to get the replacement parts for the wastewater treatment plant?
I am
How's
here.
that?
to see-
Does anybody have any questions for Ms. Parvy? Moved by Veen. Great. Is there a second? Second by Dockler. Any other comments? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Parvy. Appreciate your attendance tonight.
Move to adjourn.
2.8, motion to adjourn unless anyone has any other items for discussion. Seeing none, there's a motion by Weber to adjourn, second by Weigel. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Good night, everyone. Thank you.